must have a love of art?
A passion, ma'am. But it was my wife, Beth, who's keeper of pictures at the Fitzmullion, who chose the name.
Then I'll have another chance to meet your daughter, said the princess. Because if I remember correctly, I'm opening the Fitzmullion's Franz Hals exhibition next year. I'd better make sure I'm wearing at least a coronet if I'm not to be told off again, she added, as the lift doors opened on the first floor. The Crime Museum, ma'am, began William, returning to his script. More commonly known as the Black Museum, was the brainchild of an Inspector Neame, who in 1869 felt it would assist his colleagues to solve and even prevent crimes if they could study well-known cases. He was assisted by a Constable Randall, who gathered together material from various notorious criminals and crime scenes, which made up the first exhibits in the Rogues Gallery. The museum opened 5 years later, in April 1874, but it still remains closed to the public. William glanced back to see Ross Hogan chatting to the princess's lady-in-waiting. He led his guest down a long corridor towards room 101, where another door was being held open for the royal visitor. William found himself wondering if the princess ever opened a door for herself, but quickly dismissed the thought and returned to his script. I hope you won't find the museum too disturbing, ma'am. The occasional visitor has been known to faint, he said. They entered a room whose dim lighting only added to the macabre atmosphere. It can't be worse than 4 days at Ascot, replied the princess, when I regularly want to faint. William wanted to laugh, but managed to prevent himself. The first exhibit, he said, as they approached a large glass cabinet, includes the early pieces of memorabilia collected by Neame and Randall. The princess looked closely at a collection of weapons used by 17th-century criminals to murder their victims, including a walking stick that, with a twist of its knob, became a sword, along with various flick knives, heavy wooden cudgels, and knuckle dusters. William quickly moved on to the next cabinet, which was dedicated to Jack the Ripper, and included a handwritten letter he'd sent to the London Central News Agency in 1888, at the height of his serial killings, taunting the police by predicting they would never catch him. But then, as William reminded his guest, that was before the Met had begun to use fingerprinting to identify criminals, and more than a century before the discovery of DNA. I haven't fainted yet, said the princess as they moved on to the next cabinet, which contained a pair of antique binoculars. What's so special about them? She asked. They weren't designed for Ascot, ma'am, said William. They were a gift from a particularly unpleasant individual to his fiancée a few days after she had jilted him. When she held them up to her eyes and adjusted the focus, 2 nails shot out and blinded her. At his trial, the accused was asked by prosecuting counsel why he'd done such an evil thing, and he simply replied, I didn't want her to look at another man ever again. Diana covered her eyes, and William quickly moved on. This next exhibit, ma'am, is particularly fascinating, said William, pointing to a small plain metal box. It provided the vital clue in the first case solved by the Met using fingerprints as evidence. In 1905, the brothers Alfred and Albert Stratton were arrested for the murder of a shop owner, Thomas Farrow, and his wife, Anne. They would have got away with it if Alfred hadn't left a single thumbprint on the empty cash box. They were both found guilty and hanged. They moved on to the next cabinet, where the princess glanced briefly at a photograph before turning to William and saying, Tell me about him. On the 18th of February 1949, John Haig killed Olive Durand Deacon, a wealthy widow, while she was visiting his engineering workshop in Crawley. After Haig had removed everything of value she had with her, he dissolved her body in a drum of sulfuric acid, believing that if the police were unable to produce a body, he couldn't be charged with murder. However, he didn't take into account the expertise of a certain Dr. Keith Simpson, a pathologist who discovered 3 gallstones and a couple of the victim's false teeth in a pile of rubble at the back of the workshop. Haig was arrested, convicted, and hanged. You do like to take a girl somewhere romantic on a first date, don't you, Chief Inspector? Said the princess, which caused William to relax and laugh for the first time. Another first, he continued as they stopped in front of the next cabinet,